one of the biggest secrets that I come to in the later lectures, which I'll share now, is that the way to avoid side effects on TRT and the way to achieve what you're hoping to achieve is that you have to live in the way that you would be producing the amount of testosterone that you're injecting if your system was working properly. Personally, I would take a suboptimal protocol with optimal daily habits compared to a optimal TRT protocol and terrible daily habits. When it comes to considering a war against masculinity, the only thing that you can do is save yourself. You cannot win a global war against this, but you can understand and accept the way that the world is and change the way that you respond so that you can live a better life for yourself and the community of people around you. You have to accept that the world is the way that it is, and you don't want to be part of the problem, but you can only be the solution for yourself and your community. And that's where I think your efforts are best focused on. You look after yourself, you look after the people around you, and then you look after the greater community if you get to that point. But you have to start with yourself first. And my very good friend Daniel Pekic, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, put up a fantastic reel on Instagram about that today. He's got a great Instagram channel if you want to check out his content. We've also got a fantastic podcast we did recently in Austria, which I will also put a link to in the description. So first one here is you are a sum of your interactions, habits, diet, thoughts, and actions. This is the most important part to understand when it comes to changing who you are, is that if you wake up tomorrow and do everything right, you'll feel better. If you're eating like garbage, drinking alcohol, not sleeping properly, not exercising, and you wake up tomorrow and have the perfect diet and lifestyle patterns from tomorrow onwards, which I would strongly encourage you to do, you'll feel better tomorrow. But you'll feel so much better if you are the guy who's been doing all of that for years, or at least months. So understand that if you change your habits and routines, you want to be the outcome of those habits and routines chronically over time. And this is where you need to give yourself time and patience to change and to become the person you want to be. But you also have to have the discipline to maintain those habits and outputs when motivation ebbs and flows, because you might feel super motivated after watching this. I hope you do. That would be fantastic. That would make my day. But there will be days where motivation will be in the toilet. And when motivation's high, you don't need that much discipline. But when motivation is in the gutter, you need that discipline to maintain those habits so that you can ultimately apply consistency. Because the biggest thing that I have learned from practicing, again, with thousands of men at the moment, I literally review hundreds of cases a week. The most important variable for someone on TRT is their daily habits and routines. It's what they do and what they don't do chronically over time. Personally, I would take a suboptimal protocol with optimal daily habits compared to a optimal TRT protocol and terrible daily habits. Now, given that it's much easier to have an optimal TRT protocol than it is to execute everything perfectly, you should have both of those things. But you can't expect to feel incredible and to have all these amazing outcomes of TRT if you are not looking after yourself like a healthy, strong man. And the secret, one of the biggest secrets that I come to in the later lectures, which I'll share now, is that the way to avoid side effects on TRT and the way to achieve what you're hoping to achieve, and I've said this in the TRT masterclass as well, if you haven't watched that, please check it out, is that you have to live in the way that you would be producing the amount of testosterone that you're injecting if your system was working properly. So if you want to have testosterone levels double the top of the reference range, because that's the level that makes you feel good, and I would argue that's the level that most men do best with on TRT. But let's say top of the reference range to double the top of the reference range. The way to avoid side effects and the way to achieve the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, the expectations that you have when you signed up for TRT and did your first injection or did your first application of cream, is that you have to practice the habits and the routines and the processes of a guy or the version of yourself who would be making those levels if his system was not intractably damaged, which was the reason why you had to go on TRT in the first place. The gap between how you're living And the amount of testosterone that you're injecting is the side effect territory. And that is an undisputable fact of reality. That is as factual as the sky is blue. If anyone would like to debate me on that, please send me an email to dave@advancedfundamentalhealth.com, and I would be happy to discuss the point. So, testosterone creates a catalyst for change and an opportunity to go through a metamorphosis, but it will not make the choice to do it for you. So if you start TRT and you have this honeymoon period with a surge of energy and motivation and vigor, that's fantastic. That should be ridden like a wave to build these positive habits and put them in place. But testosterone, and this is a very well-worded slide. I'm going to give myself credit here from 3 years ago. It's a catalyst. It's a catalytic event that allows you to go through this metamorphosis change, kind of like a caterpillar going into the cocoon and turning into a butterfly. It creates the environment where that can take place. And during the honeymoon, you may feel a bit more drive and predisposition to go and do this kind of stuff. But it's not going to make the choice to do that for you. It's not going to make the choice to cut the beers. It's not going to make the choice. It might make the choice to set the alarm at 6 a.m., but it's not going to make the choice to actually get up when that alarm goes off. It's not going to force you into the gym, but it's going to create an opportunity for you to choose to have this metamorphosis change. And the second lecture in this series is talking about all the habits that you should do and that you shouldn't do to achieve this. So it's a very practical, applicable guide, which you can watch in the next lecture series. But this first one is about creating the foundation for the understanding of why this stuff is important, because people don't do shit unless they understand the why. People need to make the decision to do the things they need to do because they want to do it, not because they're told to do it. Testosterone may make you more disposed or inclined towards masculine activities and thought processes, but it's not a panacea. So when you start testosterone, you might find that you're less reactive to stress. You might find that you've got a bit more control of your emotions. You might find that your mind is more at peace, or you feel more confident in certain situations, but it's not going to reach the end result of those things on a spectrum just by itself. It might move the needle up a notch or two, but what's going to move those things up from a 2 to a 10 is not just titrating the testosterone dose up. I understand why people think that. They go, okay, these things were really low, and then I started TRT and it went up to a 2. So that means if I take more testosterone, it will go from a 2 to a 6, and then if I take more, it'll go from a 6 to an 8, and an 8 to a 10, and so on. That makes sense, but it's wrong. Because what you need to do is practice the processes and behaviors and traits which will instill these values and attitudes, which is what the subject of the next lecture that I mentioned before is. So testosterone therapy works with you. It doesn't work on you. This is the difference between taking a bioidentical hormone and optimizing your natural production versus taking a drug. So testosterone is part of your body's natural operating system. If we're going to use the analogy of a Windows computer, for people who still use Windows computers, I can't say I've used one in a long time, but testosterone is like Microsoft Word for a Windows computer. It's part of the operating system. It's actually quite common. I've seen a lot in the recent years. Men will go on TRT and they'll feel better, and then they'll stop taking it, and then they'll realize what the testosterone was doing. They were like, I didn't realize what an effect it was having until I took it out. Thyroid is similar. And this is because it is working with your body. When you drink caffeine, it is not replacing real energy or sleep. It is a stimulant. When you take a sedative, it is not naturally you being calm and relaxed. It is increasing neurotransmitters in an artificial way to push your biology in a certain direction. Testosterone brings these processes into balance, which is why a lot of the time people report that they just feel better or more like themselves, or more like the version of themselves that they think they should have felt like all along. So understand that you have to meet the medicine halfway. If you're over here and you need to be over here, testosterone is going to get you here, and then you need to work with the testosterone to get here. And the really cool thing about testosterone is that it's a multiplier. So if you're someone who is already doing everything right, and these are my favorite people to work with because it's so easy. It's like taking a sports car engine and just putting it into a sports car. Is if you've already got these processes in place, good diet, good exercise, good hydration, good sleep, avoiding alcohol, and you've got, some good critical thinking and some passion and direction for what you want to do in the world, and you've got good relationships, and you're socially aware, and you've got emotional intelligence and regulation of your mind and all these important things. If you've been able to maintain all of those processes with deficient testosterone levels, you're basically going from pushing shit uphill to pushing that shit downhill. Things become effortless in comparison, because it's kind of like the analogy I've been using since is that it's like Goku in Dragon Ball Z, who's doing a fight with someone and it's an equally matched fight, and then he takes off his weighted clothing and just kicks his ass, or when Piccolo takes off his weighted cape. That's like what going on TRT can be for these guys. But it's important to understand for people who aren't doing those things, but also for people who are, is that testosterone is a multiplier. And any number multiplied by 0 is 0. And that's a really important point. So it is going to multiply the effects of all the good shit that you're doing, but it is not going to do very much for you at all in comparison to where you could be getting if you were doing these things, because it is much more of a multiplier than it is an addition. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below. So I was going to say adder, but that's not grammatically correct. So it takes equal or greater time to undo and heal damage as it did to inflict it. Ask any physiotherapist or any personal trainer who has mastered the field. Prehab is quicker, cheaper, and easier than rehab. I can assure you of that. If you are working a sedentary job and you are lifting heavy weights and you are not doing any form of mobility and core training and things to stabilize your posterior chain, please do it now, because if you slip a disc in your back, undoing that damage is going to take a lot more work than it would have to prevent it. And everything with your biology is the same. So if you are listening to this and you are off track, whether you are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, get on track now, because it is much easier to prevent and support your health now than it is to fix it when you get down the line and things have derailed to the point of a crisis. If your check engine light comes on, you take your car to a mechanic. If you're not doing that, you should. Your father should have taught you that. But if you let the car get to the point that the engine starts smoking and you go to the mechanic, it's going to be a bigger bill. Everyone knows that. Human health is the same. So I'm going to come back now to this point that I mentioned before around endocrine disrupting chemicals. And these are primarily what's called xenoestrogens. So there are 3 categories I would put estrogenic compounds in for the sake of discussion. And again, I'm oversimplifying things for the sake of understanding. You've got endogenous estrogens, things that you make yourself. Or I guess if you want to take estrogen, these are bioidentical estrogens. So we typically look at E2, estradiol, in the blood. But you've also got estrone and estriol, which are E2, E1, and E3. I might be getting E3 and E1 backwards. But these are the natural estrogens that your body makes that bind with estrogen alpha receptor and estrogen beta receptor to exert the biological effects that estrogen is supposed to produce in men and women. You've then got phytoestrogens. Now, the most common one that people are aware of is soy, but there are all kinds of phytoestrogens in food. And phytoestrogens are very interesting because when you intake a phytoestrogen, it actually tends to have a lower DNA transcription effect, which is a fancy medical jargon way of saying that it does less shit when it activates the receptor than the endogenous estrogen does, particularly estradiol, E2, which is the strongest. And it can also compete with the estrogen receptor for binding, meaning that it can actually block the stronger one from having an effect. So it could arguably be having an anti-estrogenic effect, depending on the context. But the context that I believe is important is that you're still adding net estrogens to men, and men typically have enough estrogen when they are aromatizing testosterone into estradiol. So I don't think phytoestrogens are a positive, but xenoestrogens are the real problem. And these are the estrogenic compounds that you hear about in plastic, in pollutions, in pesticides. And these xenoestrogenic compounds are 10 to 100 times stronger in terms of that transcription effect at the receptor than bioidentical estrogens are. This is a huge problem because they also outcompete everything else. So they have what's called a higher binding affinity, meaning that if you've got your natural estrogens and phytoestrogens and xenoestrogens, these don't do anything until they activate the receptor. And when they're all racing to get to the receptor, the xenoestrogen will outcompete the others, meaning that they will occupy the receptor preferentially and then have a much stronger effect. I believe that this is a big problem, and my generation and the younger generation are the long-term outcome of what happens when you introduce this into the environment for a generation of people, and then they reproduce. And then this is the younger generation coming up who were born wrapped in plastic. So these endocrine disrupting chemicals are indisputably having a very strong negative biological effect on everyone. And these are in the air, in the food, in the water, and in an urban setting in particular, they are inescapable. Now, you can reduce your exposure by, eating better food and, drinking out of non-plastic containers and using natural cleaning products and natural products in the shower and all of these different things, drinking filtered water. This stuff all does reduce the net exposure. But unless you're planning to move to a tropical island and eating purely in an ecological fashion with the environment, it is virtually impossible to escape these. So you can reduce your exposure to some degree. And as I said previously, my primary work in the field at the moment is investigating how we can prevent these compounds from binding to the receptor and how we can upregulate their excretion from the body. And I have made some excellent progress in putting together a plan for this, which I am currently discussing with a number of scientists and doctors. So anyway, TRT allows us to fight back against a polluted and anti-androgenic modern world. So it's kind of like accepting that you're in a war and picking up a gun. It would be best not to be in the war, but if no one else has guns and there's a gun on the ground, at least it gives you a fighting chance to even the odds. So I would argue that testosterone replacement therapy gives you the opportunity to counter the influence of endocrine disrupting chemicals which you were exposed to in utero during childhood and development, because these compounds have what's called an epigenetic effect, meaning that the chronic exposure to them impacts how your genes, which are subject to input, express. So you've got genes that are set in stone, like the color of your eyes, for example. That's not going to change. That's predetermined. But you've also got epigenetic switches, and these are your predispositions towards disease and how your body is constantly changing and adapting to your inputs and outputs in your environment. So my proposition is that optimizing male testosterone levels allows you to offset for the many years where you have been in a hyper-estrogenic environment, from what my friend Dr. Rudy Eberwein refers to as essentially swimming in estrogen soup, which I think is a kind of gross but also very visually disturbing metaphor for the modern environment. So this is my proposition to why I think that the chronic exposure to testosterone, and this is the thing I've been trying to drill into my community's head over the recent years, is that the acute effects of testosterone when you first start treatment are superfluous relative to the long-term chronic exposure to androgens. And I believe that this is a multi-year, decade-plus journey where the body is able to rebalance due to compensating for these estrogenic molecules in the body, which is also one of the reasons why I believe that TRT needs to be run at a slightly higher level than many other people do. So you can absolutely limit your exposure to pesticides, eat organic food where possible. I live in a country where glyphosate is essentially illegal, and a lot of people eat very ecologically minded food. So not everyone can live in Eastern Europe, but that is a plus. Spend time in nature and breathe fresh air. This sounds esoteric and woo-woo, but being out, everyone knows that if you go for a walk in the forest, or you go for a walk on the beach, or you swim in the ocean, you feel better. Everything that you breathe in impacts your microbiome, the sunlight, the electromagnetic fields of nature and of the ground. These are all things that impact with your body. So going for a walk in nature and breathing fresh air isn't going to solve all your problems, but it's going to help with so many aspects of your psychology, your biology, your exercise. It is a very, very high ROI behavior, especially if you can get maximal sun exposure on your body while doing it. Remove chemical-laden soaps, body washes, and cosmetic products. The reason why I think this is an important point to touch on is that this is really fucking easy. It is difficult to eat 100% pesticide-free organic food. It is difficult to do a lot of these things, but what is really easy is just buying stuff to go in your shower or your bathroom sink or your kitchen sink that is not laden with endocrine disrupting chemicals, because you don't need all these synthetic lathering and foaming agents in your products. I recommend using Castile soap. You can, when you get the bottle, there's different options for dilution, but Castile soap is phenomenal. You can make your own cleaning products with vinegar and a few other things in them. You can look up how to do that. But this is just a very easy thing to do, which I don't think there is any benefit to not doing so. So you can do what you like. Many chemical additives, pesticides, and synthetic fiber metabolites reach the bloodstream in the urine and impact androgen receptor and hormonal enzymes. So not only is polyester a flame risk for if the house burns down, I mean, if children are sleeping in polyester and wearing polyester pajamas, that shit will melt and burn them. But when it comes to clothing, it is important not to wear polyester, especially polyester underwear. If you're on TRT and you've got acne and every aspect of your life is dialed in, if you're training and sweating in polyester, that can be the cause of body acne. I have fixed body acne hundreds of times by getting guys to buy a 7-pack of cotton undershirts and putting that under their polyester work uniform, or throwing out all the fucking active wear that people are wearing in the gym and just wearing 100% cotton clothes. So wear natural fibers. You can look it up if you don't believe me, but polyester on the skin gets into the bloodstream, and this has a hormonal disrupting effect. Polyester is garbage. Cotton clothing is the best, or other natural fibers. Don't wear polyester. A little bit of polyester in an outfit there or here or whatever is nothing to stress about, but the majority of the time, your body should be in contact with natural fibers such as cotton. You have to understand is that testosterone does not, by default, make you a masculine man. It facilitates you becoming that man, but it will not do that work for you. How does testosterone impact how you feel, and how are those mechanisms occurring in the brain?